All right. So if you could put your name on the top of Math Task 24 and welcome to Math Task 24. We're going to try to talk a little bit about negative and zero exponents. So let's start with our learning goals. By the end of class today, I want you to realize why a zero exponent like 8 to the 0 power does not equal 0. 8 to the 0 power is not 0. And a negative exponent like 8 to the negative first is not negative 8. And I want us to try to realize that. So that's kind of the goal. Before we do that, so I want to make sure we're putting the rules of exponents together and understanding them. So a quick reminder of the rules that we already learned. Before we get into this stuff, the rules we already learned. X to any power times x to another power. The short way to do that is to take that base, whatever that base was, and then add the exponents. If it's a base to a power to another power, you keep the same base and you multiply the exponents. And if you're dividing a base to a power and another base to another power, or the same base to another power, you can subtract the exponents, keeping the base the same. So let's try to put those together. So the first thing you should notice here is that you have two things happening. You have multiplication, meaning I need this rule, but you also have division, meaning I need this rule. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify the numerator first. I know a 3 really means 3 to the first. I know that if I'm multiplying and the bases are the same, I can just add the exponents. So this becomes 3 to the 5th power. And then this is 3, just one factor of 3. Now I've simplified it down to just needing this rule. I'm dividing, the bases are the same, and I can subtract the exponents. 3 to the 5th divided by 3 to the 1st is 3 to the 4th. Now I'm going to do this one. All right, now it looks like I got multiplication and a power to a power. So it looks like I'm going to need this rule, and I'm also going to need this rule up here, the multiplication rule. Well, parentheses always come first. This is really 3 to the 1st times 3 to the 4th. Since the bases are the same, I'm going to add the exponents. 3 to the 1st times 3 to the 4th is 3 to the 5th. And that whole thing is going to be to the 3rd power. Now I'm going to use this rule. I have a base with a power to a power, very similar. I'm going to multiply the exponents. So the base is still going to say 3. 5 times 3 is 15. So this thing simplifies down to 3 to the 15th. Here, looks like I have a division and then another power. So it looks like I'm going to use this rule, and then I'm going to use this rule. So first thing is division. 2 just means 2 to the 1st power, meaning there's one factor of 2. Since I'm dividing and the bases are the same, I'm going to subtract those exponents. So 2 to the 3 minus 1 is 2, so that's going to be 2 squared. And it's all raised to the 2nd power. Now I have a base to a power to a power. That means I'm going to go to this rule. A power to a power means I multiply, and I get 2 to the 2 times 2, which is 4 to the 4th power. That's my answer. What I want you to do is pause the video here and see if you can, on your paper, try these 3. All right. Now that you've tried that, this you should have gotten 3 to the 7th over 3 to the 1st, which simplifies down to 3 to the 6th. For this one, you should have gotten 4 to the 12th times 4 to the 3rd, which equals 4 to the 15th. And for this one, you should have gotten 4 to the 0 power. That's interesting. We're going to talk about that. You might have also realized that anything divided by itself is just 1. So I would have accepted either of these answers. And that might be a little hint to what a zero exponent means. All right. So this is the big lesson for the day, that 8 to the 0 power does not equal 0. That's the first big thing that I want you to learn. And 8 to the negative first does not equal negative 8. So let's try to figure out what it does by using pattern recognition. So the first thing I want you to do is look at this chart. It's got a bunch of missing numbers here where all the arrows are. But I want you to look at the stuff I did fill in, like 8 to the 5th, 8 to the 4th, 8 to the 3rd, 8 to the 2nd. I want you to look at this, and I want you to try to notice something, and then I want you to try to wonder something. So look at that, see what you can notice, and see what you can wonder. A lot of information here. All right. Now, let's start filling this out. Looks like this first row is filled out. 8 to the 5th really just means 8 times 8 times 8 times 8 times 8 and there's really a 1 in front of that. We don't usually write it because it doesn't change the value. If you do that, you would get 32,678. Use the calculator to do that. Now, 8 to the 4th, that should actually be this. Sorry about that. 8 to the 4th, if you do that, you get 4,096. 8 to the 3rd is really 8 times 8 times 8. You get 512. So getting pretty small, getting a lot smaller. 8 to the 2nd is 8 times 8. We should know that's 64. Well, what do you think comes next here? Well, 5, 4, 3, 2. I'm going to call this 8 to the 1st. Well, 8 to the 1st means there's only one factor of 8. Here there was 5, 4 factors of 8 here, 3 factors, 2 factors, 1 factor. So I have one factor of 8. 1 times 8 should just be 8. Right? That makes sense. Now, what looks like happening is I'm dividing by 8 every time, right? I have one less factor of 8. 32,678 divided by 8 is 4,096. If you divide that by 8, you get 512. You divide that by 8, you get 64. 64 divided by 8 is 8. What number do you think would come next here? If I kept dividing by 8, well, if you said 1, you're right, because I keep dividing by 8. So this number becomes a 1. Now, if I go back here and I think about this, well, if this is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, this should be 8 to the 0 power, meaning I have no factors of 8. But remember that little 1? That means I have 1 times no 8s. Well, 1 by itself would just be 1. So it looks like 8 to the 0 power is actually 1. So that is an interesting piece. And it kind of goes back to this up here, right? That there's no factors of 4 left. Everything canceled out. So I'm left with 1. So that is my first indication that 8 to the 0 power does not equal 0, that it might actually equal something else. Well, if I kept going here, 8 to the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, what would come next? Well, -1, right? If I kept following this pattern. Well, now look, not only do I not have any 8s here, now I have an 8 in the denominator. So 8 to the -1st is actually 1 over 8, or 0.125 if you want it as a decimal. Now, see if you can figure out the rest of this. Take a moment and see if you can figure out what the rest of this equals. All right. Well, if you did this, you realize this is probably -2, -3, -4, -5. This is 1 over 8, 1 over 8 times 8, 1 over 8 times 8 times 8, 1 over 8 times 8 times 8 times 8. This is probably going to be 1 over 8 times 8 times 8 times 8 times 8. So 8 to the -5th is really 1 over 8 multiplied together. Now, I don't know what that is, but I noticed an interesting pattern here. This was 1 over 8, and this is 8. So 8 to the -1st is 1 over 8. 8 to the 1st is 8. 8 to the -2nd is 1 over 64, but 8 to the 2nd is 64. 8 to the -3rd is 1 over 512, whereas 8 to the 3rd is 512. 8 to the -4th is 1 over 4,096, whereas 8 to the +4th is 4,096. So by that pattern, I think this is going to be 1 over 32,678. That's a tiny number. We saw tiny numbers last week a little bit. So if you did this, great. If you didn't, fix it. So 8 to the -5th doesn't mean -40 or something like that. It means a fraction or a really, really small decimal. So now that we have that, let's see if you can figure out what these are. Let's talk about these a little bit here. All right. I want you to take a minute and see if you can fill out these. What do you think the answers are? All right. So what does 8 to the 1st equal? Well, if I go back, 8 to the 1st power means 1 times 8, or just 8. Whereas 8 to the 0 power looks like it's 1. What? Are you serious? 8 to the 0 is 1? Why do you think 8 to the 0 does not equal 0, but instead equals 1? Tell me what you think. I'm interested in your reasoning here. What do you think 10 to the 0 equals? What do you think 19 to the 0 equals? Well, they're going to be 1 too. See if that can help you with this question up here. Now down here, let's talk negative exponents. Well, again, I'm going to go back to the chart. What does 8 to the negative first equal? Looks like it was 1/8. Go ahead, see if you can fill out these next couple. What do you come up with? All right. Well, hopefully you realize this is 1/64. This, I'm interested in what you think. This is going to be 1/10. This is going to be 1/19. So keeping all that in mind, tell me what you think about these two. When you're done, go on to the next task or raise your hand. But good job.